The encounter, it was a bitterly cold night in the heart of the city. Snow fell in slow, deliberate flakes, blanketing the streets in silence. Mark Winston, a sharply dressed businessman with a Rolex glinting on his wrist, tightened his coat as he strode out of his office building. His phone buzzed relentlessly with emails and meeting reminders. Nothing new for a man who lived by the clock and thrived on power. He paused at the curb, waiting for his driver, when he heard a sound. A sob. A woman sat on the steps of a closed storefront, clutching a thin blanket around her shoulders. Her face was red from the cold, her eyes swollen from crying. She couldn't have been older than 30. There was something haunting about the sadness in her expression, something raw and human. "Please? Can you help me?" Her voice cracked, barely audible over the wind. Mark glanced at her, his lips tightening in discomfort. He looked away. It wasn't his problem. He stepped into his waiting car without a word, the door slamming shut behind him. The woman's sobs faded into the background as the luxury vehicle disappeared down the street. 2. A twist of fate. A month later, Mark sat at the head of a long, polished conference table, flipping through documents. His company, Winston Global Holdings, was about to finalize a merger with a rising tech firm. The deal was crucial. It could open doors to global expansion. Mark had personally requested to meet the CEO of the partnering company. He liked to look people in the eye before sealing multimillion-dollar deals. The double doors swung open. A confident woman in a sleek black suit walked in. She was accompanied by 2 lawyers and an assistant. Mark stood, extending his hand to greet her, then froze. It was her, the same woman from the freezing street corner. Her eyes, no longer filled with sorrow, locked onto his. A knowing smile curved at the edges of her lips. "Mr. Winston," she said coolly, shaking his hand firmly. "I'm Elena Gray, CEO of Gray Innovations. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." 3. The backstory. Mark sat down, his heart thudding in his chest. He struggled to process what he was seeing. The last time he'd seen this woman, she'd been homeless, crying on the street. Now she stood before him, radiating authority and power. "I imagine you're wondering how we got here," Elena said, her tone calm but sharp. "Allow me to fill in the blanks." A month ago, Elena's life had hit rock bottom. After a failed business venture, a series of personal losses, and a fraudulent partner who left her company in ruins, she found herself penniless. Too proud to ask for help, she'd slept on the streets, trying to figure out her next move. The night Mark ignored her was her lowest point. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the cold gnawed at her bones. She had begged him for help, just a few dollars for food. He hadn't even looked at her. That moment changed something in her. "It was a wake-up call," she said. "I realized no one was coming to save me. If I wanted my life back, I had to fight for it." Elena had called in every favor she could think of, reached out to old investors, and rebuilt her company from the ground up. Within weeks, Gray Innovations had landed a game-changing patent that caught Winston Global's attention. 4. The resolution. Mark cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "I admire your determination," he said carefully. "I'm sure you do." Elena leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving his. "But here's the thing, Mr. Winston. This merger, it'll happen on my terms or not at all." A tense silence hung in the air. For the first time in a long time, Mark found himself on the back foot. Elena had the upper hand, and she knew it. He nodded slowly, a mix of respect and regret flickering across his face. "Fair enough. Let's talk terms." Elena's smile was razor-sharp. "Glad you're willing to listen this time." 5. Epilogue. The deal went through, but it was Elena who walked away with the lion's share of the benefits. Mark learned a humbling lesson about kindness and second chances. As for Elena, she didn't need revenge. Success was its own kind of poetic justice. Sometimes, life gives us exactly what we need to see, even when we refuse to look the first time.